Hey guys, how's it going today? Today I want to show you guys how to make these game pieces out of air dry clay. If you're unfamiliar with air dry clay, the name pretty much sums everything up that you need to know. It is a clay that dries at room temperature instead of needing to be kiln fired like pottery clay. In exchange for that ease of use, you kind of do have to put up with a little bit weaker material at the end, but for our purposes, that strength that the air dry clay has is going to be perfectly acceptable. And as with all my videos so far in this series, I'm going to focus on tools and items that you either already have out in your shop or garage or your craft closet, or things that are very easily picked up off of Amazon or at the local hardware store. So you can get these ideas out of your head into the world with as little upfront cost as possible. So let's head on over to the workbench and we'll see what we can do.
All right, so here we are over at the workbench with our clay. I've got a little piece of MDF down just so I keep the top of my work surface a little bit cleaner. You can wear gloves with this if you'd like. It's non-toxic, but it will keep your hands cleaner. You'll end up with a nice white sheen, kind of oily sheen all over your hands once you're done. Instead of freehanding this, I'm going to use some kind of guides and some tools that I picked up at the hardware store just to make this a little smoother. So I've cut some strips here. These are going to help us keep the height consistent on our piece. So once I smooth this out, I've just got a piece of PVC here. You can use the kitchen rolling pin if you really want to test your relationship, or you can grab a pipe of any sort. This was just some kind of conduit that I had laying around. And what we're going to do is roll this out, and because we have these strips on the side, it's going to keep our thickness of our piece consistent throughout. So I'll just roll this out here. We'll take some chunks and move them about and see what we can do here. Fold this stuff into itself. Move things around. Maybe we'll change the orientation here this way for a little bit. Okay, just until we have a nice consistent thickness throughout the entire piece. I'm not going to worry about pushing it to the edges here. Going to treat it more like you would if you were baking cookies. Going to cut our shapes out, and then you can reuse the leftovers for your next shapes. Just flatten them out again to that height. Now that it's a consistent height, what I want to do is I want to texture the surface. So I have this shelf liner that I picked up. It was seriously like $1.15 or something like that. So really cheap way to add some interest to our piece. And what I'm going to do is I'll pull this up, add a sheet underneath and a sheet on top. Try not to ruin my thickness here in the process. All right, piece underneath, piece on top. I'll still leave my guides there, that way we're not smushing it out of square. Don't want to end up with some thick pieces and some thin pieces. And then I'm just going to roll that out. And when I pull this off, we're left with a really nice, interesting texture, and we should have the exact same thing on the bottom. But now that I have a consistent thickness to these pieces, I also want a consistent square. I don't want some more trapezoidal. I don't want some to be 1.5 inches and some to be closer to 2 inches. So when I was at the hardware store, I also picked up some other things. So I got some all thread, some threaded rod, you know, about a foot long, and then some washers, Fender washers. These are 1.25 inches. If I bought these again, I might go just a little bit larger, 1.5-inch fender washers, and then some nuts to go with the 1/4 20 thread that I got here. And what I've done, you can see I just spaced those out along this threaded rod. And I used an old USTA kind of piece to space these so that I'd have a consistent spacing. You can just measure it out or cut a piece of wood to that same dimension if you're doing this at home. And then what I'm going to do with this is just like a pastry cutter, if you were using it for lattice work on like a pie or something. I'm just going to take it and cut through our clay like that in one direction, spin it 90 degrees, try and line it up square if I can, press it in, and then go, lost a piece, and go the other direction. So now we should end up with about 36 squares that are pretty close to being exactly the same dimensions. And try it with our remaining pieces. Remaining. Let's see if I can get a few more pieces out of this. Alright, our pieces have been out here and drying for a couple days, and you really want your air dry clay to dry slowly, otherwise you end up with cracks. Really thick pieces that dry quickly will crack a lot easier. And what I did is I just left them on the shelf liner, and every day or so I would come out and just turn them over, so that way they kind of dry evenly throughout, bottom, top, sides, all that. And you can kind of tell. I went back and made some thicker pieces because A, I wanted to show you what it looks like partially dried, and B, because the air dry clay does shrink a little bit as it dries. These pieces ended up a little thinner than I'd like, so I went back, increased the thickness on those, and if the camera will focus on this, you can see a dark ring on the inside, and that's because the inside of the clay is not dried yet. So you have the brighter white where it is dry, but this is still wet inside, and you wouldn't want to overly handle this or try and finish it off too much because you'll probably bend it out of shape. The next step after they are dry is we're just gonna take a file. You can use this, a nail file, the back of a knife maybe. This clay is pretty soft, but what you want to do is you just want to finish up some of these rough edges we had from our cut when we came through with those washers. And I'm just going to go around, the four sides, kind of square these things back up, knock off little bits that stick out, so that we end up with some square pieces that will stack up on top. You'll kind of do that for all your pieces, where you're just knocking those edges down, making things nice and flat and stable. Again, if it's a bigger chunk, you can kind of take the side of the file or side of a knife and just pop it right off, so you don't have to sit there like this. If this was wood, you would have to sit here and sand until it got there. This you can kind of still chip and shape with your hands a little bit. We will attempt to harden these up once we get to the finishing stage. We're gonna kind of put some sealant over top, see if we can make it a little more permanent, but that's what we want to do at this stage. So we've rolled them out, we cut them, we textured them. Now we've dried them for a couple days, and we're just going to clean them up a little bit and then move on to adding some color to these things. So let's get these cleaned up, and we'll see you at the next stage. Alright, so here we are back over at the bench. These have had a couple days to dry now, so this stuff does shrink just a little bit as it dries, so take that into account in your design process. As far as amount or number of stones you can get out of this, I was able to get about 55 of the thinner ones before I ran out of one pack of air dry clay. So if you're going to make a full set, I'd go ahead and get 2 packs of those. I think these were, let's see here, I think this was a kilogram, so 2.2 pounds. I'll link that in the description down below, so you guys can, if you want to mimic this, you can use the same stuff that I did. So now, thinking about what I want this design to end up looking like, I want it to look something like this that I'll show you on the screen here. This is what I use as my skin on playtac.com for all my tournament games. It's designed by a Gruppler. I really like the way it looks, and so I'm going to try and mimic that color scheme here. I mean, it's a very simple color scheme, but what we're going to do is we're going to have kick the camera there, rocking back and forth a little bit. What we're going to have is we're going to have a base layer that's just going to be gray, and then I'll come back and hit all the high points with the whichever side's color. So white's going to have white high points, and the black side's going to have black high points, and all the recesses and everything else is going to have that gray. So it'll give a contrast for each side's pieces, but also the gray will hopefully tie everything together as the whole set. I'm going to use an airbrush for this, but you can use a rattle can. You can hand paint them. You can leave them like this and just dye one side's colors different, so you have kind of this cream white color for one side, and then whatever you choose for the other. I mean, use coffee grounds, coffee water, have it, you know, a little bit like a terracotta, dark brown kind of color. So just use your imagination and put as much time and work into it as you want. You can use something besides a shelf liner to make this texture. You can 3D print something out to do. See if I can get the light to hit that so you can see the kind of the pattern I've got going on there. You can ball up some tin foil and kind of press it on your pieces to make a texture. You can leave them perfectly smooth. For air dry clay, if you want to smooth it even further, not at this process because it's a little past there, but earlier in the process, get it just a little bit wet, a little bit of water on your fingers, and you can rub out any of the creases or things like that. You can just kind of smooth them out with your fingers. Like I said, I'm going to use the airbrush here, so let me get that set up real quick. All right, so let's see what we can do here. I'm not very experienced with the airbrush, so if you have tips for me, just leave them down below in the comments. Just roast me for my technique and all that. Kind of blowing those things around everywhere, so let's try a little bit of a different approach here. All right, so we'll let those dry for a little while, and then we'll put the highlights on them. Hey, voiceover Bill here. I had to put a respirator on, and we had the compressor running because we were also doing some 3D printing, resin work, and other things in the garage at the same time. So just gonna voice over this part here and kind of tell you what's going on. The brush that I'm using here is just an old kind of a throwaway brush. So because you are going to be very harsh on the fibers while you're doing this. So some people use a makeup brush for this. Otherwise, just any older brush that has kind of a bushy head on it will work well. I'm going to use a technique here that's very similar to dry brushing, which is used on miniature painting. And that's where you put some acrylic paint on your brush and then wipe most of it off. And then what you want to do is just very lightly brush over the surface. And what this does is it hits the high points and leaves all the lows darker. I'm going to do it in a few layers here. I'm going to start with a kind of a gentle highlight to see how much paint I need for this particular material, because these are not plastic miniatures, so the clay is going to absorb the paint differently than the plastic miniatures would. So I'm just going to do a little bit of testing, and then as this progresses, you can see I load up with a little more paint and get a little more aggressive with the application of it. But the basic premise stays the same. What you want to do is lightly brush over the surface with your paint on your bushier brush, and that will just leave it on the high surfaces and leave all the low surfaces to be that, in this case, that grayish color for our recesses. And that's pretty much the gist of it. So you want to keep fiddling around with your paint until you get the pieces to look exactly how you want them. And then what I did was I took some spray lacquer and finished them off. And then we are done with these air-dried clay pieces.
I want to thank you guys for watching. These videos are a lot of fun, help me reevaluate some of those beginning crafting projects, and just trying to think of ways that you guys can get out there, put these things together, and really get your ideas out in the world without a whole lot of upfront cost and no expensive, hard-to-use machines. If you like this video, give it a like, subscribe to my channel. If you want to support me further, you can buy my books, follow me on socials. You can take a look at my Patreon and see if there's something on there that you like. Next time, we're going to try our hand at carving some soapstone capstones. But to end this video, as always, let's end on some glamour shots of what we made today. Thank you.